Hi, everyone. We wanted to give a quick content warning at the top of this episode. This episode contains themes including abuse, sexual assault, drug addiction and abuse, depression, and suicide. Viewer discretion is advised. Thanks. My name is Rick Firestone.
My name is Charlie Young.
And you're listening to pixelprojectradio, a video game discussions podcast where we have common discussions, creative discussions, casual discussions, and analytical discussions. Fans of the show might notice that today I am joined not by my regular co-host Ben Bugale, but by friend of the show and dear friend, Charlie Young. How's it going, man?
Oh, it's going great. Really excited to be here. Only slightly nervous.
Well, don't be. That's a command. It always works.
You're putting me right at ease.
If you tell people not to be nervous, especially if you do so aggressively, what are they have to comply. Yeah. It's all about control, right?
Compulsory calmness.
We are talking about a game today called Lisa the Painful, to be more specific, with the tagline, a life-ruining RPG. So as we generally do at the top of each episode, we generally give our short thoughts along with a personal rating. Since this is the first of these sort of deep dive shows that we've done of the year, just as a reminder, these ratings, it's just a personal thing. There's subjectivity and objectivity that go into everybody's rating system, whether they're professional or hobbyists, as it should be. But just know that, if we give this an X out of 10 and we gave your favorite game something lower, it's just a personal opinion. We're not trying to lobby that your taste sucks. Although it might. Who's to say? So, Charlie, since you are the guest here, would you like to go first? What did you think of Lisa?
Sure, I've got as a friend of the show, I'm familiar with the one-sentence review. I've got it labeled OSR here in my doc. So
he's already streamlining our process.
I've got rubbing my hands together. You can't see it there at home, but I am pumped for this. So let me give it a shot. Lisa presents a pendulum swinging back and forth from light hilarity to sincere tragedy through a rich and dark yet absurd world. A world that enhances and flavors all aspects of the generally straightforward gameplay. 8 out of 10.
All right. We have not really talked about this off air. So I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed it so much. Although I guess that's kind of a tough way to put it, enjoying this game.
Yes, I would say enjoyment is a relative term. Maybe joy, there's less joy in that. And more appreciation, or I don't know. I'm thinking of words like immersion and investment, I think is the word I was looking for. Like, I think you can be invested in something even if you're not enjoying in the sense of joy.
Yeah, precisely so. The purpose of art is not always to elicit feelings of happiness. And this work does that in spades. Let me get through mine, and then we'll sort of talk about how we came to find this game. Lisa is a challenging work in regards to its subject matter and story. It knowingly uses hefty doses of humor and visual gags interspersed with an oppressive atmosphere and bleak thematic material to create a whiplash-inducing experience, leaving the player wondering what the appropriate emotion to feel should be. A journey through a dilapidated landscape starting with winding tales of Nern's wife's potato salad and ending with a broken man concludes with a single question that sums up the journey perfectly. Did I do the right thing? This for me is a 9 out of 10. This is one of my favorite games of all time.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I actually have a slight caveat on my 8 out of 10. I don't know if we want to talk about it now, but so for me, the replayability was a factor in how I perceive the game now. So my 8 out of 10 is for a first playthrough, which I deeply enjoyed. And then I would say some of the luster wore off on my replay. I think some of the strengths of the game that I appreciate are like in the way that you experience everything for the first time and sort of how tightly packaged it is to conclude in about 10 give or take hours. But there's so much in it that I can appreciate that I definitely would still recommend. That's why I kept my rating as high as I did.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. This is a game that we've both, at this point, we've played through it roughly twice. And there's a lot that you can see on subsequent playthroughs that maybe you wouldn't have experienced the first time through. So as far as our histories with this game, when did you learn about it? When did you first maybe play it or experience it or hear about it?
Sure. Well, I have a very brief history. I would say sometime in the fall. I know the semester was going, so it must have been sometime between like August and November. I saw you streaming it. I just happened to tune into one of your streams, and you were playing something that I hadn't seen before, and I hung out for about 45 minutes and I was quickly intrigued by the humor and the music, and was very interested in it from that point on. I didn't do much with it at that point until I saw that your show announced an episode on it, and then I was like, well, if they're going to cover it, I really want to know the ins and outs of these things, and I think it's worth the investment. So I played it over sort of the Christmas holiday as I went home to visit my family. That was when I needed a chance to step away from the family. I went and played Lisa.
You needed a nice light experience away from the family, so of course, Lisa the Painful.
If you think about it like a foil, by contrast, the weight and responsibility of being with your family for more than 1 week can all of a sudden start to feel light and effervescent compared to playing Lisa.
I mean, when you put it that way, it practically invites itself. Yeah, I had forgotten that I had streamed that, and I didn't finish streaming it, and I'm kind of glad that I didn't. This falls into a category similar to Disco Elysium for me, of games that I don't have anything against streaming it necessarily, but it's a story that I want to experience alone without having to sort of wisecrack and relate to other people in the room. But I had actually first played this game for the first time back in, I want to say 2015 or so. I had watched a Video Game Donkey review of it, and this was one of his dunk views. And what he does and I recommend it highly, by the way. What he does such a great job of diluting a lot of the game into solely the comedic and absurd and irreverent moments that it obfuscates the larger themes and the stories. And he does it in a way that makes his listeners go like, "Oh, what a funny game!" And that's exactly what I did. And it's not just that. But I didn't finish it for the first time until this past December of 2021. Speaking of dates, however, this game was initially released in December of 2014, so it's a bit old. It is actually the second in a series of games. The first game, titled Lisa the First, Lisa the Painful, being the second and most fleshed out in terms of story and mechanics. And then because of a Kickstarter goal, Austin Jorgensen also released Lisa the Joyful, which was a DLC update to the base game in 2015 that kind of takes over the story and builds a lot of the world around it.
Do you have any experience with the other two games in the series?
Yes. I started and almost completed Lisa the Joyful. I kind of willingly went to get spoiled on Joyful just so I had a more comprehensive a more comprehensive outlook on the game's lore and how that might tie into Lisa the First and Lisa the Painful. But I have not finished it. And I'm glad that I did that too, because although Jorgensen has said on Twitter that, he didn't really want to make Lisa the Joyful, he wanted to stop at the Painful, it's interesting because there's so much in the Painful that leaves open-ended questions that Joyful ties up so succinctly, almost like he had intended to put them there from the start. So, but this is all stuff we'll get into. We haven't even talked about what this is.
And I'll just throw this out there. After having listened to an interview with him, he does pronounce his name Jorgensen with a hard J. I don't know which one's hard and which one's soft.
The hard J grew up in the streets.
Yeah. And so he's it was funny that in the interview the guy's like, "Are you Swedish?" And he's like, "I think I'm Norwegian. You know what? I don't know enough to say for sure. It's Jorgensen."
Love that. Okay, so Austin Jorgensen. This is largely.
I said Jorgensen like right before we started recording, and I'm like, I'm such a fucking idiot. You can cut all this if you want to, but
no. This is pertinent. This is necessary listening to fully understand the ending, as far as I'm concerned. So Austin Jorgensen. This is largely sort of an auteurish thing. He wasn't the sole person, from what I understand, working on the game. But much like a game that this gets endlessly compared to, Undertale, this is largely the result of one person, that being Austin. Although this does get compared a lot to Undertale, it came out before that in 2014, or did I say 2014? Yeah. But in my opinion, it couldn't be farther from Undertale outside of its visuals.
I can't speak to that very much. I've played maybe like 2 hours of Undertale. I don't think I've gotten very deeply into the story, so
that's fair. So, just summing up Lisa to somebody that might be interested in playing it, it is a 2D side-scrolling RPG. It's most similar to Earthbound, I would say, in terms of its style and visuals. It was made in RPG Maker. And the premise of it is that there was a sort of an apocalyptic event known as the White Flash that wiped out, for whatever reason, and unfortunately the game doesn't really go into specifics, it wiped out all of the women in the world. In addition to this, it also completely decimated physical society, so things are in ruins, everything is sort of brazen and dilapidated, and things like that. The main character, Brad, finds a baby that happens to be a biological female, and she gets kidnapped, and this is his journey to find her. That's a pretty watered-down version, but them's the facts. That is what happens.
Yeah, it's a really interesting premise. I'm not totally sold on the idea that we need more information on how or why. I think that's one of those things that as soon as you start to look a little bit closer, it might start to break down, and sort of the lack of information actually aids in the suspension of disbelief. Just invest in what's happening right now and don't try to unpack the lore of how we got here.
No, I hearing you say that out loud, I can definitely get behind that. In real time, I'm playing through, well, not in real time because we're recording, but in life right now, I'm playing through Persona 5 Royal, and that game has quite good writing and a good story, but one thing that they do is they sort of explain every single plot point to the point where it does start, as you said, it breaks down. So maybe it is for the best that they didn't explain it. But that's sort of the background and the elevator pitch, if you're interested in a story like this. The only thing that I would add on to it is it, as I said in my quote-unquote one-sentence review, it vacillates wildly between this sort of really... I hate the phrase dark humor, but dark humor and really well-handled thematic material such as abuse and trauma. That's the only thing that I would sort of add to the elevator pitch for somebody that's interested in looking into this, and indeed how it differentiates itself from things like Earthbound or Undertale that it endlessly gets compared to. Yeah,
that's about as much as I perceived when I got to see you play a little bit of it, and it was enough to get me hooked. So I think the people who are out there who are interested in that kind of thing already have their ears perked up at this point in your description, for sure.
Perfect. Well, let's get into sort of the game and how it works, and first off, how it looks. Visually, this was made in RPG Maker. It looks very similar to Earthbound. I don't think it would be inauthentic to say that Jorgensen took a lot of inspiration from Earthbound. It does look very similar to that. It's 2D, it's a side scroller. You're going to the edge of your screen to progress to new areas. Other times you're going through caves and tunnels and that sort of thing. And the fighting, we'll get to the fighting and the mechanics, but it plays out very similarly. The scenery is sort of like apocalyptic Midwest, I guess is the best way to put it. It takes place in a town called Olathe, which is weird because that is a city in which I used to live and work. When I briefly taught adjunct, I lived in Olathe. It is in Kansas, and I can see this landscape happening should an apocalyptic event unfold and completely decimate the economy and the, general land. It looks very similar, and it was kind of weird at first. I was like, Olathe? Like, really? That's okay. But it's not confirmed that it takes place in Kansas. It's not even confirmed that it's pronounced Olathe. Some people say Olathe, which I think sounds silly. But nevertheless, that's sort of how it looks.
Those comparisons to Earthbound are especially valid because the creator does mention it as one of his favorite games, and when he's talking about the art style in some of the interviews he gave around the release time of this game, he mentions it frequently and says, yes, let's get those comparisons out of the way. I love that game. That's where a lot of the visual style inspiration came from, and then tried to take it in my own direction. So
yeah, and successfully so. So that's sort of the visual aspect. There's not really a whole lot that goes into the visuals outside of that, aside from like visual gags, but we'll kind of talk about that as we get to them. I guess since I mentioned that, that's another thing this game does really well, is it has this biting yet irreverent humor that is just pervasive. That's one of the first things you noticed, right, Charlie?
Yeah, absolutely. The amount of times you just chuckle out loud, sort of involuntarily, are too many to count. And I think there's something to be said about the pairing of tragedy and comedy. When people talk about actors trying to cross over from one discipline to the other, that we see that comedians tend to be much more successful at transferring into dramatic roles more so than the other. And I think it has something to do with the use of timing. And you might wonder, like in a 2D side-scrolling RPG, like how does timing play in? But I think the spacing of the lines, like when some action that's out of your control happens, like it's all timed pretty well. That's what gets you that immediate gut reaction to the comedy. But also, I think there's so much of that goes into the tragedy of it. Like I made a note of this opening scene while the main character is still young, kind of before he finds the child in Rick's setup there. He walks in. He walks home after being beaten up. Walks into a room where his dad is watching TV, and the dad gives him a 1 pixel look. His body shifts exactly 1 pixel, and I just thought that's perfect. Like, you could have him shift fully profile, you could have him not move at all, but it's like acknowledgement to the littlest amount possible given the technology. And there's something both tragic and funny about that motion. I don't know. I just thought it was such a sweet detail, and things like that are peppered throughout this whole experience.
It's a game that's not afraid to play with subtlety. It trusts the players and the consumers of this work to understand it and to get it. It doesn't hand you everything, and I appreciate that. You mentioned timing. The thing that I always and specifically how that relates to comedy and a 2D pixel side scroller. The thing that I always think about is there is a section. Well, there are many sections where you're walking around and you see dead people laying all around. You're seeing all these people that are dead, and you walk to a cliff and there's a guy that's alive. And if you talk to him, he says, "Holla holla if you hear me." And then there's just a pause. And he says, "Really needed to get that off of my chest." And then he just drops and dies. And then that's it. And that's all it serves. That's one of my favorite like short little visual gags in this game. But that the pausing and the time between dialogue, it just makes it hit so much better. I love it. And that's peppered throughout, as you said, throughout this entire experience, which at times is necessary, as we'll talk about, I'm sure.
Yeah, I have a prepared tangent whenever it feels appropriate to get to it about Nern. So I don't know when we want to get to Nern, but boy, my first and second experience with him.
There's nothing I love more than forced organicism. So let's talk about the characters right now. Your main character, as we said, is Brad. Brad Armstrong. He is a former karate master. He used to have a dojo. This is revealed pretty early on, so it's not really a spoiler. He is addicted to this substance called joy, which is sort of a new age drug. He is the focus character. He wants to save Buddy. Buddy is the name that he gives the baby that he just happens to find.
Yeah, Brad is an interesting character. I don't know if we're planning to do an overview of the characters, or if we want to dive on Brad right now. Maybe that's more appropriate once we get to more of the story. But I have some thoughts on Brad as a protagonist, his motivations, and sort of the cyclical nature of like parenting and abuse, substance abuse, those kinds of things. I think there are so many great aspects explored with this character. But I think you're right. Let's forge on some of the other members of his squad, at least in the early game.
For sure. Your early game squad consists hey, partner. Your early squad consists of three other folks named Cheeks, Sticky, and Rick, which was a bizarre experience for me playing this game, because you never see my name in these things. But nevertheless, yeah, those are your childhood friends.
It was bizarre for me too, especially because I'm only playing this game through my experience watching you play it. Literally the first time I played it, the opening scenes, I kept getting confused between Brad and Rick, because they're like four-letter, common names, and I think of you as the person I know, therefore he must be the name of the protagonist. Like, it just was this weird switch up in my brain that I got over after an hour or so, but it was always a little humorous.
Well, I am also bald, bearded, overweight, and approaching middle-aged, so...
And a master of karate.
And wildly depressed. So it's not without merit. But those are your three childhood friends. They show up later in the game, too. There are also a host of party members that you can get throughout this game. We're probably not going to name all of them, frankly, because I don't know all of them. I'm not that intimate with the wiki on this, but one of them was already mentioned. His name is Nern, and pretty much everybody recruits and finds him. So what did you think of Nern, Charlie?
Well, it's time for a bit of honesty. The first time that I encountered Nern, I was a little high, and his story that he tells, or series of story fragments, they just go on and on and on, and he keeps acting like he's wrapped up, and then he's on another tangent and then another tangent, and you actually get a couple of chances to walk away from him, but as soon as you get to the next screen, he's already on the next screen and engages you again. I've got a couple of quotes here that I think are just perfect. He says something like, while I scroll to find it, he says, "I can tell by the way that you're walking away that you want to hear more."
And this is after several minutes of dialogue from him.
Yeah, that first time. So when I get high, I get like time dilation. Like, I can't tell how long I've been engaged in an activity, and I start to panic that it's been way longer than it actually has. And so I'm listening to Nern's stories, just going, I must be way higher than I feel like I am, because I've totally lost the thread of this game, and I should probably stop. But on the second playthrough, totally sober, and had the same exact experience. I was like, no, I still don't know what's going on. It must just be the writing.
And the thing of it is, too, is that the several minutes of dialogue largely seem tangential. It's Nern talking about his wife and how he wishes he looked as good as his neighbor, and his wife, God rest her soul, making potato salad. It's just all of this. I've watched a few playthroughs of this where people have narrated it, and I think that is comprehensively a downgrade from just reading it. However, Video Game Donkey, again, his narration of these scenes with Nern is just terrific. It's genuinely hilarious.
Yeah, and the mixed messaging on the referral to his wife, both sort of like the fond. He's telling all of these stories sort of in a way that you'd expect somebody to be fondly remembering a dear loved one, but keeps referring to her as my horse wife and my potato bitch wife.
It's my potato bitch wife, God rest her soul. It gets me every time. So that's Nern. Everybody's going to encounter Nern. Everybody's going to also encounter Terry Hintz. I think Terry Hintz is a phenomenal character, but we will get to him probably once we get to the story. Some of the other characters that I recruited that I particularly liked, there is a drunk man named Birdie Hall. His attacks are all drinking based, so you have to drink in battle as him, and then he'll get abilities like Spit Up and Drunken Nap and shit like that. You can recruit one of the Wish.com Power Rangers. His name is Dick Dixon. It's pretty good. Nern we talked about already. There's also this really jacked buff playboy named Ajit Mandeep, who is wildly against drugs. You can recruit him. His skills are poking based, like with your finger. It's very bizarre. How about you? Who did you recruit, and or like who did you enjoy?
Yeah, so one of my go-tos in both playthroughs was Olin. He's an archer that has just a ton of awesome abilities that he can do with his bow. There is, on the second playthrough, I figured out how to recruit Rooster Coleman by holding his baby chick hostage. He agrees to join your party to like see you through your mission. And he has some like up and down attacks, like they don't hit all the time, but one of them is like a storm of baby chicks that just rushes the whole field. It costs a whole lot of like SP. I don't know what SP. I can't remember what SP stands for, but that's like your ability points, sort of. And like, but when it hits, it really hits. And then most recently, I've been working with Tiger Man, who you have to like he like kills everyone in a dojo, and you go in and basically defeat him, and then he joins you. And yeah, he also has a joy addiction, which we'll talk about how that affects gameplay. So he's a little up and down, but when he's up, he's really effective.
That's a perfect segue too, because joy addiction plays into the other NPCs and antagonists that you'll find in the form of joy mutants. So joy, we've mentioned, is an addictive substance in this game. It's a drug that was created to make you feel numb. It makes you feel nothing. There's a small bit of dialogue with Buddy towards the end where she says it makes you feel good. I largely just chalk that up to a typo. But joy makes you feel nothing, and it's highly addictive. And when you get addicted to it and take it long enough, you start to mutate into joy mutants. They're sort of like horrifically disfigured versions of people where the limbs might get really long, the neck might get enlarged, the midsection might get super bloated. It really just kind of depends on who is taking it. But joy mutants basically act on their innermost carnal desires only. They are not sentient, really, or intelligent beings, and they're a big threat because many of them in this game have permadeath moves, which is common, by the way. Your party members can and will die, and permadeath is a thing.
Yeah, their sprites range, I would say, generally from like maybe 2 times the size of the average player or NPC to several times that. I mean, 5, 6, and depending on which dimension you're talking about, there's some that their body winds through entire cave systems and you just encounter the head. So they add a lot to the grotesquerie. They're sort of Cronenberg-esque, like that like body horror in presentation.
It's a really good physical manifestation of one of the chief themes in this game, that being the cycle of addiction. But before we jumped into the themes, just because I think that's going to warrant a little more discussion, let's talk about the sound design real quick. I'm very excited to get your opinion on the music. What did you think of it?
This music goes hard. I listen to this music in my car now, and it just gets me hyped up for like going to school. I work out of school, going to work. But like just mundane things, like I don't know, there's an eclectic mix of like things that feel very sort of minimalist, ranging to more generally like modern art music, to like house music and like sampling and like really nice like trap beats. Like there's all kinds of things packed into this. A nice mix of like 16-bit sounds, but also like actual sampled instruments and voices that are manipulated to sort of fit the soundscape of this game. And I love pretty much every bit of it.
Yeah, did you say eclectic or eccentric? They both work,
eclectic. But eccentric is a great word too, yeah.
They're both great descriptors. This music to me, it's very brash, it's rude. It's almost intentionally so. Intentionally rude, I think, is a good descriptor for a lot of it. I agree with you. It gets me pumped up, but it doesn't get me pumped up in the same. It's not a pump up song like you might listen to by Daft Punk or something, or a funk band. There's one, for example, that directly samples a grunt from a character from Shenmue 2. That plays in one of the fighting arenas, and it's just so obnoxious and so grating, but it's also so good. And if I remember, it's going right here as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Like the obnoxious, rude, like unpolished. I think all of those elements add something of like a lack of inhibition, hibition. No, but there's something about that that's freeing. Like it makes me want to dance to it, and I don't always have that experience with music, and even like pump up music. I mean, like sometimes I do. It depends on who I'm with. But like when I hear this, I'm just like, let's fucking go. Like rules are off, bets are off.
And diegetically, it works too, right? Like there is the main theme of this, I believe, is called Summer's Love, and it features a very sultry is not the right word, maybe just a very velvety smooth trombone. And that's good, like don't get me wrong, but the tracks that do get intentionally rude and break the rules and dissonant but still pump you up, it's very indicative of what's going on in the world, right? Like it would be bizarre for, I don't know, let's say like Shostakovich's Eighth String Quartet. It would be bizarre to hear that in this setting, I think, outside of a few scenes maybe. So I love the almost primitiveness of these tracks. I think it's stupendous. It's in the wiki, it's listed that Jorgensen composed it. It's listed in the game as Widdly Too Diddly. Do you have any insight on that from the interview you watched with him?
Yeah, that's an alias that he's taken for specifically for the music. So he did for Lisa the First. Somebody else did the music, and I forgot to take that guy's name down. And there are a couple of cameos in the soundtrack from that original, but maybe like 2 or 3 of the tens of tracks that are on this, and he did most of it himself exclusively with sampling, but it's all like you said, this sort of auteur project. Like, he's taken total control of the music, the pixel art, like all the aspects. And I think I absolutely agree that it fits the setting so well, especially the sort of absurdism that both, like, it plays with the stakes, it plays with the state of the world, but it also plays with, like, the humor, right? So that pairing of absurd music, absurd setting, absurd humor, it's just really complimentary.
Yeah, I couldn't put a better feather in that cap. It's really terrific. And I hope the music that I have decided to put in after the fact here maybe piques your interest if you're interested in this game. That sort of brings us to the last and biggest can of worms to talk about, which are the themes. So I have written down a few, but I'm interested to hear your take on this, Charlie. What do you think are some of the biggest themes that this game works with?
Yeah, so so many of them get brought up, like, right away in the opening, and sort of, like, corkscrewed back to throughout the different encounters with the main characters and the main plot points. But it explores a lot the theme of parenting or like parent-child relationships, and especially how abuse and or neglect to different degrees can be handed down almost like unstoppably through that parent to child to that child's child, etc. Like, I think Brad is a great example of somebody who had a rough relationship with his parents, or with his father in particular, where there was almost like a negligence there. And so his reaction to that is almost swing the pendulum too hard to the other side. And obviously there's good reason, because the circumstance of the world is he needs to be protective of Buddy. She's the one female in this world that lacks a way to reproduce, and so basically the species is doomed except for her. So there is a need to be protective, but I think he goes so far in the other direction because he's trying to undo the lack of care that his father did, or that his father had for him. But also, his father was an alcoholic, possibly a drug addict, we're not sure, and then because of his trauma that he experienced, Brad's trauma, he also falls to some of those same things: alcoholism, drug addiction, and they really kind of like mess with his ability to parent effectively. So I think that substance abuse and a generational substance abuse is sort of another tie in there.
Yeah, we talk all the time about how, like, or at least I hear it all the time, how video game writing is sort of a different tier than literature or movie writing. And I think that's not an unfounded cliche. However, I think it's more than appropriate to spotlight good writing when it's there, and this is good writing. Brad is an awful character with motivations that are based out of genuine care and love for Buddy. He is a character that it's tough to say. He's not redeemable. He's not a good guy as he progresses through the game, but it is based in a very real desire to do good and to be what his father wasn't, as you said. And again, as you said, he sort of course corrects his parenting style onto Buddy, based on what he experienced as a child with his abusive father, Marty. And it's just so well realized, and you don't see that a lot in games. I can think of two other games that come close to this sort of thing. Disco Elysium is an obvious one, but man, the writing and the interactivity between the themes and the characters are just top notch.
Yeah, and you also get a little bit of, I feel like, it's hard to say unreliable narrator because there's not really a narrator, but in the interactions that you get to see Brad as the character that you're playing, he sprinkles in these little bits of dialogue every once in a while that make me wonder, is he totally altruistic? Is everything that he's doing about love? Because he uses words like "this is my second chance" when he refers to Buddy, and that comes up in the sort of the prologue, but also in a couple of the interactions later when he's trying to convince party members that he needs to continue on, or convince his original crew as he encounters them throughout the world, like this is the right thing to be doing. But he never says, I mean, he always talks about the need to save Buddy, but there's always that added, this is my second chance, right? So it's a chance to redeem himself, which is a little bit of a nuanced motivation, I think.
It's nuanced, and it's again, this game handles trauma really well. It's him trying to atone for the death of his sister Lisa. We should say, you may have mentioned, Lisa is not a character in this game. This series is sort of based off of and starting with her. Lisa was Brad's sister, and we'll get into this when we get to the story, but she died and was horribly abused, just like Brad was, and Brad feels that he couldn't stop it. So you're exactly right. Like, this isn't 100% altruism. This isn't a black and white thing. It lives in that gray area and handles it more maturely than I think most games, even AAA games, do.
Yeah, and I think some of the authenticity that we see in the storytelling here, there was a nice point in the interview that I got to watch where he talks about how when he started developing Lisa the First, he basically wanted to create a beat 'em up style game. Like, that was his primary motivation. He was like, what if it was post-apocalypse and it was just a bunch of buff guys beating up on each other? End of sentence. And he said that game development sort of went on the back burner for like a year. And while it was on the back burner, he spent a lot more time thinking about it than working on it. And he had all these questions in his mind, like, okay, well, how do we end up in this situation? And while at that same time, he had a relationship with a girlfriend who had a really fraught relationship with her father. And he said, no matter what he did, he wasn't able to patch that up. No matter what, how he and his girlfriend's relationship like seemed to improve or grow or whatever, there was always this, I think I've written the quote down. He uses the word sludge, and he said, like, no matter what I do, this sludge is always seeping back into our relationship, and I don't think there's a way out of this cycle. So I think that's part of the reason why, like, he decided to break up with that girlfriend. He didn't go into details there, but and he mentions, like, this isn't a revenge game about her. This isn't like a fuck you to her, but like, there's so much reality to this story. He's experienced it firsthand, and I think that's why he tells it so authentically.
And I could be wrong here too, or I could be conflating fan theory with his actual tweets. But I think there's a lot of himself in the character of Brad too, where sure, he might be thinking that he's trying to fix things and patch things up, and that's what his intention is, but the reality is something much, much more sinister, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he specifically envisions himself as Brad, but I could totally see that helpless quality when you're trying to repair a relationship and you feel like you don't have any tools available to you. I mean, you totally see that manifest in Brad's actions and like arc.
So, as we said, the themes in this game largely are surrounding things such as addiction, relationships, specifically relationship abuse, generational abuse and addiction, pain, the impact that has on others. Some other things that are in this game are instances of drug abuse, instances of sexual assault, instances of assault in general, suicide, and depression. So I put a content warning at the beginning of this episode, but it's worth mentioning again if you wanted to, jump in and just hear the generalities, that more of that is coming. So if that is a trigger for you, that is something that we want to make perfectly clear. And for your sake, maybe pick a different episode. We've got plenty.
Yeah, check out Spyro. Nice and light.
Yeah, that's the one where Ben brings up 9/11 out of left field, and it makes me laugh every single time, even to this day. Yeah, so we've sort of covered everything. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about before we dive into sort of the story and where it starts?
I think one more theme that's worth talking about is just, I don't know if misogyny is the word, but like you see this society that has no women grappling with what to think about women. And there's obviously a lot of objectification. I think a lot of that boils down to utilitarianism, and not to excuse the objectification, but because there are no women there, the scarcity creates, this like outsized, it's like when you have an image of somebody in your head, that image of that person is not that person. And the same thing is going for this whole society and women. Like you remove women and all that's left is like the imaginings of women, and they no longer are really people. They're just a concept and something to be sought after. And so it brings out a lot of the worst in men, and the men in this story, and how they view and talk about women.
Yeah, and that in tandem with, I neglected to mention, the currency of this game is not money, it's porno magazines. So there is a lot of, I'm really glad that you brought this up, because I glossed over it in the notes, and I did not mean to. There is, when I said this out loud for the first time, about how this was a game where the premise involved the extinction of all women, I kind of recoiled a bit and said, like, that sounds gross. And it does if you just say it out loud. But again, I think this is a credit to Jorgensen's writing. It's never presented in a sympathetic way. It's never presented for any real kind of comedic effect. It's never, nobody ever says anything along the lines of fuck women and people go, yeah. It's never like that. It is explicitly, when that is spotlighted, it is showing the degradation and dereliction of these characters. And again, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that's a really big point in this game. I've seen folks mention that toxic masculinity is a theme in this. I'm not sure that I would call it a hard theme. Like, I don't think that he intended to do a lot with it. But it is there, right? Like, as you said, these men no longer view women as tangible people, right? They are gone from society. They have become objectified objects in the mind. They have really become a means to an end at this point. And it's not repopulation for most of these guys, right? It's something more sinister. And it's horrible, and it's never presented as anything but that. So if you turned it off at the top whenever we mentioned that women have gone extinct, I guess this is too little too late. But do know going into this that it is not presented in any kind of way that makes misogyny or even the idea of it okay. I'm being a bit long-winded. Charlie, help me out here.
Sure. I'll try to tie this back into the conversation that I got to watch with him as well, where he talks about, I think the specific question in that instance was, there were some concerns, and I should say the timing of the interview was just before the game's release. So some people had a chance to play some demos and see some of the artwork, and Lisa the First was already out, but the story and the full game of Lisa the Painful were not out yet. And so he's fielding some like anticipated concerns in this interview. And there were some people concerned about the treatment of homosexuality because there are no women left, and because there are things like brothels where men pretend to be women, and it's not, some of that may be like authentically transgender men who just feel, or transgender women, I should say, who feel like, okay, the burdens of society are off. Now I can feel comfortable being how I want. And some of them are just finding new ways to be useful in this society. And he says his goal is not to advocate for one side or the other. He said he wanted to present no message. He just wanted to present like the variety of possibilities that he anticipates would be out there and let them speak for themselves. And I think the same thing is happening with the way that you see people talk about women. He's saying the game doesn't reward or punish any of the views. It's just some men might treat women like this. Some men might remember them like more honestly or treat them more reverently. Like, I think, again, he's trying to present a variety of real reactions and let them speak for themselves.
This is something that we say a lot on the show. We always say, feel free to write in if you have any comments or criticisms. Specifically now, I would like to echo that. Even when it's Ben and I, but also right now when it's Charlie and I, we are just a couple of straight white guys. That doesn't invalidate our opinion, but we do not have anywhere near the scope or the lens through which to view these issues in a real and concrete way. So please, by all means, feel free to write in if anything that we say strikes you, or if the game strikes you. We are more than open to that dialogue.
Yeah, and I should add, we have blind spots that we want to know about, and that's not by way of defending Jorgensen, but just to share his thoughts, to shed some more light on how the game got to this form. So yeah, we'd love to hear the thoughts out there.
And with that, I think it's time that we put all of this into context and sort of dive in to Lisa the Painful. So just a quick preface, the first game in the series is titled Lisa the First, and it's not necessary to know the backstory, but in my opinion, as a gamer American, it's really beneficial and holistically improves the experience. So what happens in Lisa the First is Lisa, Brad's sister, she is the protagonist. She was compulsively sexually abused by their father, Marty. This game sort of takes place of her trying to escape, largely does not work. She feels the only way to do so is to end her own life. All throughout Lisa the Painful, Brad is visited by hallucinations of her. He feels that because he was alive and witnessing this, and also being abused himself, that her death is largely his fault. These hallucinations sometimes interact with Brad, asking why he didn't do anything. Other times, they're just there. So that is sort of a quick and dirty preface of what happened in the first game and how it affects this one here. So the game opens with you, Brad, and your friends getting beat up by another group of kids for stealing their ball. We're led on to believe right away that Brad is what's the word? He's very protective of his friends because he stands up for all of them. He said, "No, it wasn't Rick that stole your ball. It was me. I did it." So they beat the shit out of Brad. So we kind of get the feeling right away that he likes protecting people. So you're walking home after you get beat up. It's a very scenic suburban American landscape. People are mowing their lawns. There are cars parked, etc. Those are not your houses because your house is beaten, broken, and dirty. And when you walk inside, this is where we first are introduced in this game to Marty. He is a large man, always wearing an unbuttoned shirt and sunglasses. He is an alcoholic. There are beer bottles everywhere. And when you come in, he turns off the TV, if only for a moment, does that one pixel turn that Charlie mentioned that is so effective, and essentially berates you for coming home with your ass beat. And he says he won't buy you another shirt, chucks a beer bottle at you, and forces you to go upstairs, which you do, and you cry yourself to sleep. Game title appears on screen. A hell of an opening.
Yeah, it's interesting how we're about to enter the post-apocalypse, and yet we're already just filled with the themes that are going to come up later. They're sort of, I don't want to say inherent to humanity, but we're seeing them manifest regardless of setting, and they're only going to get worse from there.
There is a time cut, and it's you, Brad, as an adult man. You're outside around this sort of barren, cliffed wasteland. And this is where we first see Brad taking joy. This is that incredibly addictive drug that we mentioned. It is a numb-all. And this is where Brad finds Buddy, just a crying baby, swaddled and just abandoned on the ground. This is also where we get the first sort of comedy of the game. Sort of. It's funny. I'll say it. It's funny. He picks up the baby. He goes to like lift her up and down, and then he drops her and just goes, "Oh my God." And it's funny. I mean, it's funny. Dropping babies is funny. And it needs a spokesperson to say so.
This is a pro dropping babies podcast.
Oh my God. We have to make jokes to deal with some of the stuff in here, honestly. You bring it back to your friend group from the beginning of the game. That is Cheeks, Ricky, and Sticky. And everybody looks like shit. As do you. Nobody is wearing a complete shirt. Everything is dirty, etc. Everybody's freaking out because you have new life. And when you check and find out that she is a biological female, suddenly everything shifts, and your cohort is now sort of shooting off what are we going to do with this baby?
Yeah, quick brainstorm sesh. And some of the first suggestions are we should take her to Rando, who is a sort of warlord who has an army, has a lot of resources. And I couldn't tell genuinely at this point if they were being practical, like this child will have the best chance with the resources that Rando has, or we need to take her to this warlord because if we don't and we're found out, it will be bad.
I kind of interpreted it as the second, as them looking out for their own asses, because directly before this, the first thing that somebody says is, I wonder if she'll be hot. So we're already sort of seeing the effects of the lack of women in society on downtrodden men that are here. So I don't know. That's my take personally.
Yeah, I think you get nuance right off the bat, because they say a baby, that must mean there's a woman. I wonder if she's hot. And I think that's what they're referring to. I think, like, where did this baby come from?
My bad.
And then immediately after objectifying this hypothetical woman, it's this is a girl. Oh, we have to protect her, right? So it's like a little bashful moment there of like objectification to protection kind of juxtaposed right next to each other.
Yeah, you're right. After they suggest giving Buddy to Rando, Brad says no, and he says that he's going to keep her a secret and protect her at all costs. And throughout here, you sort of see glimpses of them hanging out with the baby. Brad is shown tossing his joy over the cliff. That is a big deal because, as we've sort of noted, Brad is an addict, so he's trying to get clean.
Yeah, you get some idyllic sort of home life scenes. There are scenes of them making like crayon drawings together. The gang bands together to dig out a secret room underneath their house so that Buddy will be safe. And then eventually, when she gets old enough that people might recognize that she is a girl, that's when they introduce the mask so that Buddy can wear a mask and poncho and go out safely in public without being identified.
I had mentioned that Brad throws his joy off of the cliff. He shortly thereafter has a hallucination of Marty, his dad, handing him a baby saying, "You deal with it." Hallucinations are a big part of this game, and they happen a lot. And they sort of signal Brad's mental demise and his physical transformation. This one, I think it's just a baby to sort of give the hybrid symbolization of Lisa and Buddy, but this prompts Brad to take joy once again. And then it does a time cut to where Buddy is a child, as she is in the game, standing over Brad, who is just passed out in a sea of beer bottles and joy. So this is solidifying right away, to those that haven't played the game, Brad has an addiction. Throughout, Buddy tries to leave the house during the prologue, which Brad always corrals her back in somewhat forcefully. This buddy doesn't like this. She is seen crying in her room, which, upon seeing so, Brad throws all of his joy out again. This is where he makes the mask, Charlie, that you mentioned, so she can walk around. All of this is a sort of, some could say, overprotective way of ensuring that Buddy lives the life that Brad wants her to. Again, this sort of course correction and overswinging of the pendulum of parenting that, is influenced by how Marty treated him.
Getting up from his joy episode, Brad hears a dog barking, and you see the man, Terry Hintz, Lord of the Tutorial, and he's stuck in a tree, and he's being pursued by a small puppy named Cheese Legs, and he's pulled his groin, so he's going to need some help. He can't fight the beast. So this initiates your first fight of the game, in which you kill a small helpless dog.
A small helpless dog that has chased a grown man up a tree.
Okay, so sure. So he's got motive, so maybe there's more there than I'm giving him credit for.
So we've gone over the battle system. It's very much like Earthbound. All of your party members get to input their attacks or actions before all of them plus the enemies go. That's how that works. Brad fights Armstrong style, so he uses keyboard combos like WWD or SSA to do certain combos and different abilities. I love Terry Hintz, and in this essay I will talk about why. Terry Hintz is sort of crowned Lord of the Tutorial by himself. I love that the game isn't directly breaking the fourth wall by saying, like, well, if you press X, you'll be able to jump. That should get you to that cliff over there. Like, I don't like that. This has a sense of, like, puckishness where it's self-aware that it could be doing that, but it's not going to go all out and do that. Also, Terry, this is getting just a touch ahead, but Terry joins your party, and he describes himself as a fierce warrior. He is not. He sucks, at least at physical attacks. And it's what the game is doing is it's showing you through Terry's shitty physical abilities that his special abilities to be able to sort of give pep talks and talk or yell at the enemy, i.e. support abilities or buffs and debuffs, that is how he's supposed to be played. And that becomes a critical part of success in the game. And I was thinking about this earlier, and I was comparing it to something that I know that we've both played, Final Fantasy X. You've played Final Fantasy X, right?
I have played some Final Fantasy X. It's been enough years that I can't make any specific references to anything that happens in it.
Well, that's okay, because all of this stuff comes pretty early on. In Final Fantasy X, when you get a new character like Wakka uses the Blitzball. When you get a new character, it puts you into combat with the enemy that character is meant to destroy. In Wakka's case, flying enemies. And then it says, hey, I bet I could hit that flying enemy with my ball. And that's exactly what you do. Rinse and repeat for every single other character in Final Fantasy. This game is a little more subtle than that. By giving you Terry, who sucks at physical, it's teaching you early on that support skills are going to be a huge boon for you. And it continues to do this with the new characters that you get. But I just love Terry. He's in my party all the time. He's so good.
Yeah, and he's giving you he's teaching you by experience, like you're talking about. Like, obviously you find out you can't fight like this. He's only effective if you fight in this other way. But he's also talking to you, and he's also leaving you little posters and signs around the world to kind of help you navigate right towards the beginning.
Yes, those posters are where the game does the whole, like, press this button to do this, or, like, approach this to save. And Terry signs all of them in affectionate ways, like Tear Bear or Handsome Tear or things like that. I think there's one that just says, beware of Terry's good looks.
They are dangerously appealing.
It's a really nice touch, and they're all throughout the game, which is really helpful because there's a lot. The combat system is a little more complex than it lets on, considering all of the debuffs that are possible. But after you help out Terry, after you help out Tear Bear, you're walking home and you see just blood and beat down. And Cheeks is there. He is dying. You talk to Cheeks, and he says, "Secret's out, Brad. She's gone." And then he dies. You can go inside, but you just find a couple more dead guys. Buddy has been kidnapped. And this is where Terry says, "You shouldn't go alone. I'm a fierce warrior. I'll help you out." So you've got your first party member. This is also where you get to sort of the first hub, or right as you get into the first hub, the crossroads. There are 3 main crossroads in this game, which brings us, I guess, to the map. Did you find this map to be confusing?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I definitely did too. I used like a visual walkthrough for this.
Yeah, as I got farther into my second playthrough, when I knew that there were specific things that I wanted to be able to get back to, I started to look up what the maps looked like and find out what the different entrances led to. It wasn't clear to me in my first playthrough that there were 3 primary hubs that I should be thinking of as pivotal points in the map, because everything feels so, as a 2D side scroller, everything feels so linear, even though that's not really true, but it's hard to imagine the directionality and the different places you can go to. And so it took me a long time after that to figure out that's what's happening. In my first playthrough, I never used... There's a sort of fast travel mechanic. One of the character party members that you have has a truck, and I think he's one of the characters that you have to get into your party. And you can get between these hubs in that truck. And I was just scared to use it because I thought, if I go back, I'll never know. I won't be able to get back to where I just transported from. It was that confusing that I felt turned off from that game mechanic.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Once I realized what the truck keys did, I used them. But the game itself, the way that the maps, there's a lot of caves, and a lot of the setting and scenery looks similar. Like it's a lot of muted browns and oranges and yellows, and you're gonna see a lot of that. Or it's a lot of cave. So if you're playing through this, I recommend using a visual map. I think it's incredibly helpful. There is a very good one on the Lisa wiki, the RPG fandom wiki.
Yeah, that aspect is one of the reasons that the replay value diminishes slightly for me, because it starts to feel tedious the way the map is laid out. So as soon as you get into this new Area 1 crossroads, you're immediately hit by a truck. And when you wake up, you and Terry are there with Columbo, who is the kid from the very opening who beat you and your friends up and takes your ball. And he says, normally he would kill you, but he gives you a choice of either taking all your belongings or Terry's life. And this sets up sort of an ultimatum narratively that you will run into throughout the game, with exceedingly more dire consequences depending on the request. And it also sort of, those ultimatums are one of the primary ways that permadeath is dealt with in the game. So Rick, when you encountered some of these ultimatums, what roads did you decide to go down, and what effects did they have?
Come on now. You know me. I'm not going to give up Terror Bear. I at this point, I didn't have very much anyway. I had a few things of joy and some jerky and Coke. So I kept Terry. If you give up Terry's life, Terry doesn't actually die. He just gets kidnapped, and you'll find him again later in the game. And he basically says hey dude, what the fuck? That wasn't very cool. No, I of course, I gave him my belongings at this point.
Yeah, I think both playthroughs I went belongings on this one.
One of the things that I like about this ultimatum system too is, it acknowledges that a very video game thing to do is to exhaust all of the options. And in many of the ultimatums, there's a third option where it's take my belongings, kill my friend. And the third option is like, why are you doing this? Or like, I'll kill you. And they know that gamers are going to choose that. And if you do choose that, usually both things happen. Your friend will die and your items get taken, or whatever the consequences are. I love that. I think that is it's oppressive as a gameplay mechanic. It doesn't, it doesn't make things easier, but it's so good narratively.
Yeah, I think it goes into his philosophy, Austin Jorgensen's philosophy. He says, like, specifically the interviewer asks him about replay value and how many times do you expect people to play this? And he says, I know there's a lot in the game. There's a lot in the game on purpose. So if you really want to go deeply, you can. But the idea is you're going to go through this game and you're going to miss things. I know that gamer instinct to try to turn over every rock and try to complete. And I don't want you to have that experience. So in that respect, I think he even says, I want it to be, you cannot really 100% this game unless you care that much. But I hope you won't put that much effort into it.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's such a great attitude.
It really fights against that philosophy of I have to do everything. He wants you to know that you're going to miss things and that's part of the experience. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not all about checking all the boxes and getting the gamer achievement. There's more to it than that. Up here, there is a guy that's going to try to ambush you. His name is Bobby Diddle. This sort of sets up how ambushing works in this game. He can ambush you if you approach from the left. If you approach from the right, he will say, hey, buddy, could you take 2 steps to the left? And then he ambushes you, which is pretty funny. But what you can also do is jump off of a ledge up on top, which drops you down onto him, breaking his neck. That is a valid way to take care of enemies in this game, if you can, but it doesn't net you experience, generally. There are some exceptions, but generally that doesn't work out. I also wanted to point out, too, that this area is where the difficulty curve tends to spike, in my opinion, too much. There's a tunnel here that you can grind fighting like shadowy enemies. That's basically mandatory. You cannot get through the game if you don't grind at this point, because the enemies get significantly more difficult. And by significantly, I mean just the matter of a couple of levels. But even if you know what you're doing in terms of status effects, like, you've got to grind at this point. And the spike to me was a bit sudden. Like, I know that the atmosphere is supposed to be oppressive and unforgiving, but it was a little much.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I started to die a bunch. I don't think there were many places in the game where I repeatedly died to a certain encounter, but I did get the sense that if I don't deal with my health after 1 or 2 encounters, I am not going to be able to progress. And so I'd go try to take an encounter, then go back and save and rest and save again. And we can talk about maybe the camping system, and that's the one part of the game that I did save scrum was resting. But yeah, it felt a little tedious to go have 1 to 2 encounters, backtrack through the map to a place where you can recuperate and then progress again. And so the grinding really was the thing that gets you out of that sort of loop.
Yeah, Mr. I didn't die here. I'm a better gamer than you on your own show. Yeah, I see what you're doing, Charlie. This was your plan all along.
I didn't say I didn't die. I said I didn't die multiple times to the same encounter.
I'm not bragging. It's more of a humble brag.
I'm not a better player, just a better strategist. I'm just smarter.
I can't push buttons as fast. My brain is bigger. God damn. You mentioned camping. That's an important part of this game. You can rest at campfires and in tents. And as you mentioned, RNG is not always on your side. So you save scrummed a lot of this. What did you run into that caused you to want to do that?
Sure. There were a couple of different outcomes when you camp. You can either the effect of camping is that your party is fully recuperated. All of its HP and SP are refilled. Any status effects are wiped out. But you all are also vulnerable while you're camping or sleeping. And so there are certain places where you can sleep that is safe. Sometimes those cost magazines, or sometimes you have to complete a certain task in order to have access to that safe sleeping space. But otherwise, you can be bitten by a spider in the night, giving all of your party deep poison. Party members can be abducted through the night, and you have to go find them to recover them. You can have your items stolen. I can't remember if I don't think it's all of your items, but like some of your items can be stolen. So those, and sometimes it's more mundane than that. Sometimes it just shows during the night somebody coming up and farting on you, or you wake up and there's a note lying next to you that just says something menacing. I can't remember the specifics, but it's just like, you better watch out,
I think the note comes whenever your party members get abducted, because they generally will tell you, like, if you want your guy back, come here. And that's, you had mentioned the ultimatum system before. If your party member gets abducted, it's generally, I either kill him or you pay me this much magazines. And if you try to do the third option, like, I'll kill you, then they say, you think this is a game, they shoot your party member, they're dead forever, and then you have to fight them. So it's one of those situations. It's pretty cool. But you are right. Resting is risky. I like that they added this, because otherwise it would just be, a little too easy, forgiving.
Yeah, so when I said better strategist, I meant I cheated myself out of the better experience and made it easy for myself.
Sure. You're going to Aurora Town next. Each of these sections has a name, although it's not always announced in the game. Before entering Aurora Town, this is where you're going to find Nern. We've already talked about Nern and his horse wife, God rest her soul, at length. He gives you a little bit of exposition as to the flash, basically just that he was going to sleep. There was a loud flash, and then he woke up. So we kind of covered all of that, but Nern was around, and he lost his wife, God rest her soul, in that event. This is also where you get your first hallucination with Brad, where he sees a flashback of Marty and the baby. These are prevalent throughout the game. I've written down a couple in the notes that are important, but they symbolize Brad's declining mental state and physical state to addiction, as we've mentioned.
Yeah, so the next sort of thing that you can do is you come across this building where as soon as you enter, it's totally dark, and you see somebody or some people singing Joy in My Heart. And when the lights come on, it's a bunch of people wearing these joy masks. I think this is the first encounter that we've seen with people wearing these masks. Does that sound right? And they're with their leader, Buzzo. And he says that you seem unhappy and gives you some joy, and so you get like 3 pieces of joy into your inventory. He doesn't force you to take it in this moment, but you just get it in your inventory, so you can use it if you want. And I don't guess we talked a little bit about joy addiction, and we mentioned that it plays into gameplay and combat, but joy is an item that you can choose to use in your inventory, and because it takes it takes feeling away from you. You get certain buffs in combat for using it, but also when you're done using it, or just periodically throughout the game, you'll experience joy withdrawals, which is a big debuff. And so the game sort of encourages you to, you have to deal with the addiction on a gameplay level, right? When you're not taking it, it's making you weaker, and so you get that craving that encourages you to continue to use it.
Especially withdrawal, that makes you considerably weaker. And it's really easy to power through fights if you decide to take joy, because all of your hits, at least as Brad, are crits, and you are just massively powered up and fully revived. So it's, again, it handles the addiction theme I don't want to say better because that's boring. It handles it with more finesse in the writing, but I'm glad that they took the step to implement it in the gameplay as well. You mentioned Buzzo, Charlie. When I was doing these notes, I couldn't remember if we knew Buzzo at this time or not. I'm almost positive we don't. Buzzo is going to be an antagonist throughout this game. His entire existence, as far as you're concerned, is to torment you. You know, right here, he's giving you drugs basically to fuel your addiction, because he knows that you are addicted. You don't know that he knows that, but he knows that. There's a lot of backstory between Buzzo and Lisa, namely that they were, I don't know, I don't want to use the word lovers because they were a little too young, I think, but they were romantically involved when they were kids. Buzzo resents Brad very deeply for Lisa's death. And speaking of death, the orphanage is up ahead, which is one of the funniest scenes in the game to me. You just find this guy with a bunch of kids, and he's like, "Oh, this is the orphanage. Tommy, put the match down, sport. Don't play with fire. Oh, you're gonna get hurt. Ah ha ha ha." And the kids accidentally light a match on fire, and he's like, "Hey, hand me that bucket so I can put this out." So you do that. You hand him the bucket. You toss the bucket of liquid onto the kids and the match, but it's actually gasoline, and it sets all the kids on fire. And he's like, "No, I meant my water bucket. It's all the way up there." So it's comically far away. You have to go get it. And by the time you come back, they're burnt to a crisp. And his only response is, "This is the second worst thing to ever happen to me in my life." And he just does not, he does not elaborate any further.
Are these kids a plot hole? They seem too young. I don't know how long ago the Flash happened, but they must be the last children born.
They look, at least if we're going off of their sprites, they look a little older than Buddy. And she was born before the Flash.
No, I think she's born after the Flash, right? Because it's like, how is this child here? Her plot significance. Like, oh my God, there's a woman somewhere? How did this child happen?
This kind of goes into spoilers for the Joyful. Essentially, her dad had a hand in all of this. She was born to a woman who dies in a lab. And from what I understand, the Flash either happened right before or right after. So I guess she could have been born to a dead woman. The wording is ambiguous in the wiki.
Okay. Either way, I think it's not addressed in this game.
No,
exactly
no.
How the timing works out. But anyway, it's neither here nor there. It is hilarious. I was always just wondering, like, how do these kids even exist?
Well, they don't anymore, thanks to you. So this game has a couple of sections where you have to do a certain number of things to progress. And as Charlie said earlier, the game, you're going to be doing stuff that other people are going to miss and vice versa. So the ultimate goal for this section is to get across this broken bridge via a truck belonging to Farty Hernandez. You need the keys from Farty, and he is not around. But he can fix it and, drive over the bridge if you could find those keys. Now, there's a lot of other stuff that you can do around here. We're probably not going to get to all of it. So if you play through it and you get something that we didn't, apologies. But
no, that's
I have
bonus.
Noted,
you get something that we didn't. Yeah, good for you. Congratulations.
A couple of things that happen, though, is you find the bike here. This is mandatory. To get to the bike, it's a child's bike, which you're going to be riding throughout the whole game because you can't run. You're overweight and middle-aged and also depressed. But you find a child's bike. To get to it, you have to beat a Joy Mutant, and it's one of the first ones you fight in the game. What this fight teaches you is firebombs are your friend, because to fight the thing, there's a guy that's kind of hanging out with it for whatever reason. He tells you, yeah, you'll probably need a couple of tough guys and some firebombs. So that's what that's teaching you. Firebombs are super effective, and they let you take down this joy mutant, and you get your bike, this children's bike, which you're going to ride throughout the game, let you hop over small things, and etc.
So this is where we then, is it after the gap, now that you have a bike, you can proceed past the small gap that was getting in your way, and this is where you get to the men's club?
I believe so. Again, it's a little tough to tell because of how intertwining these cave systems are. But yes, to get past anything here, you do need the bike.
Yep.
So tell us about the men's hair club president.
Yeah, this was the scene that I got to see on your stream. This was my introduction to the game. You get into this club. There's a gang of people trying to get in through the front door, which is barricaded, and they're having no luck. But you can jump in through a broken window. If you go, or you go up onto the roof and go through a broken portion of the wall. And I think the reason that you're there is because you hear that they have a girl, and there's only one person who that could be. So you make your way up through the building. I don't think you engage in combat with anybody until you get to the top level, and you start to talk to the presidents. And they are giving you their pitch. They're selling it hard. They're telling you how much you're going to like it there. And then I guess they happen to look at you for the first time, and they're stopped dead in their tracks. What is that shiny, glistening thing on the top of your head where your hair should be? And that offense cannot be rectified. And so you engage them in combat. There are 3 of them, and all of their beautiful hair is combined into one entity. Does it have a name? It's its own. Yeah, it's like a big hairball on top of their heads that you can target independent of the 3 of them.
Again, with fire, so that's going to cause the hair to burn. Yeah, it cracks me up because they're pitching to you, and then they're like, "Wait, you're bald? What the fuck?" And then they just like proceed to attack you.
Yeah. Oh, the hair manatee.
There it is. Love it. We do find out beating them is required to save Farty because they don't actually have a girl. They have Farty Hernandez. He's been tied up and violated horrifically, and that's how you save him. The achievement for that is violated guy. So that's kind of funny. That is like the big mandatory thing that you need to do to get to the next area, right? Because Farty will go on with his truck and fix the bridge. There's another thing that you can get to that you might miss. It's a hallucination with past Rick. His wife is super mean and cold to him. He comes home with the whole, "Hi, honey, how was your day? Oh, this is great. Brad's here." And his wife's like, "Okay, like I'm going to go watch TV alone." And he's like, "Okay, honey, that's great." And his son comes down, who is a very jacked black kid that's like bigger than everybody, hinting at infidelity because haha. Lisa also appears here too, because Rick says, like, "I can't keep this up. This cheery facade, I hate my life. I wish I could be more like you, Brad." And then we get the hallucination with Lisa and the sort of flesh background that indicates a joy-induced hallucination. Not incredibly plot significant, but I think it's a great flavor to add, especially as, Brad's journey progresses.
Yeah, it gives Brad an opportunity to say to Rick, or I guess Rick says to him, "I wish my life could be like yours." And it gives Brad an opportunity to say, you don't know anything about my life. It's not what it appears to be. He's doing a good job of presenting something other than the internal struggles that he has to his friends.
There's also another flashback with Sticky. This one isn't quite as far back, but it does show that before Joy, Brad was addicted to painkillers. It shows him demanding painkillers from Sticky, who's saying, like, "No, I don't want to help you with that, Brad. Like, you don't need it." And Brad just kind of discards him, like, once he realizes he's not going to get it. So that is pertinent lore building. But aside from that, there are some other things that you can do. Not incredibly important, but they are there. Farty fixes his truck and the bridge. This is where you get the save system, the fast travel system that Charlie was talking about with the truck keys. But now you can cross the bridge, and further on, you find Rick, present-day Rick, surrounded by dead bodies. You interrogate him, saying, like, where's Buddy? I heard she was here. But he doesn't want to talk to you, and he actually kind of punches you and just runs away. Interestingly enough, considering what's about to happen, you also see a ghost of Lisa here, just sort of watching over you.
Yeah, those are sort of sprinkled throughout. It's hard for me to place them all mentally, but they come in slightly different flavors. Sometimes it's a single person, sometimes it's multiple of her, sometimes I think she's hanging. So there's all sorts of hauntings of that ilk. At this point, you catch Rick and you tie him up, and you're trying to sort of interrogate to figure out where Buddy is. But he's not willing to give her up. He doesn't believe that Brad is the right person to be helping her. And this is sort of, you get to see over time each of your original crew kind of turns and doesn't believe in Brad's. I don't know if they don't believe in his motives, but they certainly don't believe that he's the person that can accomplish, her salvation. So they all sort of turn away. And since he's not giving her up, Brad picks up a club. It's got some nails in it, and he starts to beat Rick, trying to get the information out of him. And it accelerates. He gets angrier and angrier, and before long, he kills Rick. But before he dies, he does tell you that Buddy is with Sticky.
Before he starts the beating, like, we get that flash of red that signifies the joy-induced rage that's coming on. So this is a big point in the game, showing that Brad's addiction has now got him to the point where it's taking over his emotions in such a way that he's willing to kill his friends to accomplish what he believes is right.
Yeah, you start to wonder if his motives are love. Where does that start? Where does that selfish aspect of it, my second chance, where does that start to override and become nothing will stand between me and this goal? Even if that goal is ostensibly like, a person that you love.
Right. It's not all as Brad believes it to be. As you progress forward to the east, you are met once again by Buzzo and his crew. Buzzo says, we go way back, because you ask, who the hell are you? Again, Brad doesn't really remember. At this point, he grabs another member of your party, and he gives you another ultimatum. This time, it is your arm or your teammate's life. Then he proceeds to ask, have you changed at all? Et cetera, et cetera. You can have your party member permadeathed here, or you can choose to have your arm chopped off. That's what I did. What did you do?
First playthrough, I killed the party member. Second playthrough, I took the arm.
Who was it?
Gosh, who was it on that first one? It was probably Nern. I was using a steady combo of Nern and Olin. Nern to pump Olin up so that he always had enough points to use his bow abilities. So he was probably hanging out at second there. Could have also been Terry. Because Terry kind of filled that role for a while.
Damn, those are two of my favorites.
I know, yeah.
You bastard. When your arm gets chopped off, when your party member gets killed, that's self-explanatory, but when your arm gets chopped off, your addiction to joy increases, your defense and attack decrease, and you lose the ability to use two-handed combos. This happens again later. There's another ultimatum with an arm, and the same exact things happen, just they stack if you do that again later. That is what happens here. And then Buzzo takes your arm. When you exit the cave, you find a dying man next to a motorcycle. This is where you sort of get to ride the motorcycle just for a short bit. It gives you a little tutorial, basically tells you how to do a wheelie that'll let you jump over shit and not to wear a helmet because that's lame. Standard procedure and protocol for riding a motorcycle in real life. Just kidding. You should wear a helmet. But the bike is super fast, so you eventually unknowingly crash into Rando and Rando's army.
Yeah, the motorcycle sections were frustrating for me. It felt like I had to basically memorize the timing of when jumps were so that I could progress through it. And sometimes it would take me, 5 minutes of sitting there through a segment of the game that's not really that long. It's not. So in those 5 minutes, you've redone it maybe 30 times maybe not that many, but it felt like a lot. And I do remember getting frustrated at some points.
Yeah, no, it's definitely frustrating. But at least you don't die from anything. You basically just crash and have to redo it.
Yep. I found myself wishing that there was a checkpoint somewhere in the middle. Like, I think that would have been enough to get the experience that they wanted out of the motorcycle mini game, but also not to there's no salvaging any of the run that I just did.
So as I said, you crash into Rando. We've been hearing all about Rando all throughout the game as this powerful gang overlord. What is Rando like, Charlie?
Yeah, well, you like you said, he's got this reputation that you would imagine him to be ruthless and powerful, but you find out that he is, I don't know, pragmatic, verging on sympathetic. He wants to make reparations for causing your motorcycle crash, and so he offers up some Rando rations, which are an incredible boon item that fully heals your HP and SP, and he gives you 8 of those, which is quite a lot. It's like the most of any single item that I had in my inventory, I think. And as he passes you, he speaks really softly. I think he just whispers to one of his gang members, and so you get the message relayed that way. So you don't actually hear his voice, and then as he passes, you can see tears behind his mask. So there are some complexities going on there.
Yeah, but despite Rando being a nice guy, their lackeys think that that's not fair, so they attack you. But it's nothing serious. What is serious is the next section. You enter a cave and you see this carny-looking dude that's sort of watching you walk through it, and he jets out right as you do. And of course, him and his men ambush you and take you to probably my least favorite point in the game, Russian roulette. This is... What you have to do is you have to win 3 times at Russian roulette by sending your party members, but it's random and it's permadeath. And those two things mixed together with a story progression pisses me off to no end. Like, I save scummed this so hard, and it was so frustrating.
Yeah, I thought that the actual playing of it, and maybe I think I was probably on the lucky side, or I don't know if the RNG is designed to be sort of slightly more in your favor, or if it's truly 50-50 or 1 out of 6 or however Russian roulette works. But I felt really immersed and intense playing this. Because I took my time with it before every trigger pull, trying to anticipate what was going to happen and like brace against the potential gunshot. So I thought it was really effective. I did get hit harder the second time, where I lost, I think, 2 party members. Yeah, so you have to win. You have to, the opponent that you play against, like 3 opponents have to die. So it might have been better if you just played 3 rounds and let the outcome be what it was. But if you kept losing, then you keep having to sacrifice party members, which is totally frustrating.
Yeah, and I had mentioned in a row, that's wrong. It's just 3 overall, I believe. My first run, 4 party members died, and on my 5th, I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm not doing this.
Wow.
I'm just... Right. Yeah, no, I really think it's true RNG in terms of the 1 out of 6 chance, of you getting the bullet. I know what they were going for. It was one of those situations where, like, the game presented this to a point, and I understood the point because the game does it so well during everything else. And in this point, I was like, I get it. Stop making me do this.
Yeah.
Let me go. But once you do, I mean, that's it. Like, you never have to deal with that guy again. I think you can, if you choose to, for money.
He mentions,
perhaps.
that you can come back to make some money, but I think you and I both were of the opinion that I'm not coming back to this experience.
Hell no.
Now, I do think that the plethora of potential party members is partially designed to forgive the number of these like permadeath situations that you end up in. Now, that doesn't mean that you can keep all of or that you're going to find all of them, or that you'll have plenty by the time that you get to this point. But I think the game does offer a solution, even if it. But the caveat there is like you still have to progress those party members that you're replacing. So if like when I lost 3 party members at one point, they were all around level 18 to 20, and then the people that I was bringing into the party to replace them from my sort of backbench were like level 10 and 11. So then I all of a sudden had a lot of grinding to do before I could progress again.
Right. And I get that. I get that they sort of built that in with a plethora of people, but that grinding is just so annoying.
Yep.
At any rate, you can save scum if you like. Moving forward after that, this isn't, apropos to anything. I just think it's really funny. There's a guy in the cave named Mike Punmaster. He just tells you really bad jokes. And when you leave the cave, there's a guy outside, and he's like, hey, I learned a joke from this guy in there. Why am I by the water? Because I love the sea. Or wait, no, it's because I see the ocean. And then it's just a beat of silence, and he jumps in the water, never to be seen again.
Yeah, the funny part of this to me is I don't get his correction either. Like, neither of them are good.
It's not. Oh, I think we've both been in front of classrooms. You certainly more than me. I have wanted to jump into a lake after saying something stupid.
Yeah, it gets easier. You stop caring so much. Like, well, that was dumb. Moving on.
Speaking of more silliness, you can choose to do this or not. There's a group in this game called the Salvation Rangers. It's a group of older shirtless dudes that wear Power Ranger masks and sort of enact live-action roleplay. Their catchphrases, like each one has a catchphrase. Some of them are like, eat your vegetables. And others will say things like, always listen to dad, even if he's been drinking. Or don't pay for drugs. Let your friends do that. It's very good. But you can choose to engage with them or not. They eventually turn into joy mutants, and you can recruit one of them if you want to. Just before Crossroads Area 2, there is a very important thing to see. That's just labeled very important above. Did you do this?
I did, and I did it knowing, I don't know exactly if I knew what it was, but I had heard you mention it. I don't remember if it was in a Snapchat or in an Insta story or something where you were griping about having done this, and I was like, well, now I got to do it.
I'm almost conflicted about spoiling it in this episode as to what it is.
That's true. I think it's worth the visit, and we'll leave it at that.
We'll leave it at that. This next area is Crossroads Area 2. This is your second big hub of the 3. You've got to get past Rando's army blockade. That's the big... They have Buddy and they won't let you through. That's the big thing here. So you've got to do a bunch of things to get through there. Namely, you need to get TNT because there are some boulders and rubble blocking various caves and stuff like that.
And so in order to get to the TNT, you have to go through this section sort of reminiscent of like Mario style levels. I think we skimmed over before, but there were some guys called barrel bros where they're rolling in barrels, and it's basically you have to dodge where they are by carefully getting from one platform to the next, or getting to a rope and out of the way. And if one of them rolls into you, then it starts an encounter. They're all going at different speeds, and they all have different territories that they are limited to. And none of them are very difficult battles, but it's just sort of an annoyance, and like meant to slow you down more than anything. And here we get something similar with these football players who are rushing back and forth in their football pads. And also, some of them are throwing hammers for some reason, which I think is specifically how it's mentioned in game.
Well, it's an homage to the Hammer Bros from Mario, right?
Yeah.
It's cute and fun. I didn't mind this at all.
Yeah. And if you spend some time there, there's items sprinkled throughout this little maze of scaffolding. So, it encourages you to try your hand at more than just getting through, but also trying to get to different areas. And it is pretty fun.
There is a short section where you get to pilot a bulldozer. This is one of the scenarios where, you can plow over NPCs for experience in the bulldozer without having to fight them. You end up fighting another guy in a bulldozer named Horace Finkel. They get into this really dramatic backstory about how he's always wanted to go to bulldozer school, and then he did, and he graduated with his bulldozing degree, but he fails to get his wife out of a hole in the bulldozer, and she dies. And the priest at the wake is like, well, you could have saved your wife if you weren't so bad at bulldoze driving. Your loss. And then your grandpa comes in and says, you suck, grandson. You'll never be a real bulldoze driver.
Yeah, and he doesn't actually graduate, but he does receive a diploma from a guy whose name is very similar. It's like, this guy's name is Horace Finkel, and it's like Morris Dinkle, and it's like, my name is Horace Finkel, and he's like, well, we must have messed it up. Here's your diploma. And he walks out, and then immediately the other guy walks in and goes, I'm Morris Dinkle. I'm here for my diploma.
It's just so good. It's so funny.
Yeah.
Horace gets really bummed out over the flashbacks, and he's like, I don't want to do this anymore. So he just apologizes and cries as you kill him.
You literally bulldoze him.
There are some optional content areas here, such as the Muscle Cave. Earlier I mentioned the music sampling a grunt from Shenmue 2. This is where that happens. You can also squat cars and barrels here. There's another optional place called Muddy Waters that take you to the Beehive, which is the brothel for men that we brought up in the beginning. Did you go to this?
I did go there. I didn't realize, so you do get offered a job there, right? I declined it, but I didn't realize you can actually become a prostitute.
Oh, I did.
Wonderful. Full support.
The nod and pause between, perfect. Yeah, no, you can. The prostitution is, it takes the form of a fight, and your commands turn into scratch, whisper, nuzzle, things like that.
I did go down the rabbit hole in a different, there's a side area that I think is sort of out of sequence, or you can go to it at different points, I think, but there's an island, what is it called? Disgust Island or Misery Island, something like that.
The one that you have to use a boat to get to?
Yes. You said that like you were gonna be like, oh, that's called blank.
And that's an example of a pause that does not get edited out. No, I remember it vaguely. I didn't
Island.
Really go. Dismal.
Yes. And yeah, so you take a boat, you get up, you climb up a black rope, and you're like, why is this rope different? And when you get up to the top of this big mountain, there's a guy laying down, and it's his mustache. And you go into the little hut at the top of the mountain there, and there's a guy in there, Slave Lord Jim, and he won't let you leave, and he forces you he says, go to that guy. I guess his name is, whoever the mustache guy is. He says, go to him and tell him you want to change your name. And you have to change your name to Sexy Boy. So
I do remember this. That's right.
You go over and it opens a menu where you can change your name. I tried to change it. Well, he says, go tell him your name is different, Sexy Boy. And so it's not clear that you're supposed to change it to that, but it won't let you change it to anything else. I was like, oh, an opportunity to change my name. Cool. I was dumb. I was like, I'm just going to change it to B-Rad. I'm just going to insert a hyphen in here because it gives you all of the numbers, letters, and symbols that you could normally update your name with. And you go back and it's just like, no, it won't let you leave. So you have to go change it to Sexy Boy. And then he gives you a dress. And then you come on to somebody. Anyway, it was a good time. You do get an opportunity to change your name back at the end of that encounter, but.
And there is a way to ruin the final scene of the game by wearing that dress. Not additive, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The next required place that we need to go, now that we've got TNT and we've got all that out of the way, is to this Holy Land. You're walking through and you're hearing this religious music, and people are talking about, I didn't write down exactly, but they're talking about some divine presence. And you see W's sort of reminiscent of the McDonald's logo, but upside down. And you learn that these people are worshiping this guy called Wally from the restaurant Wally's. And you get to see somebody partaking in this ritual that they frame as this coming of age thing that to go from boyhood to manhood, you have to, order at Wally's. And the kid walks up to this loudspeaker and he's like, "Dear Lord, praise thy name in your infinite wisdom. I'd like a triple cheeseburger meal with no ketchup and some nuggies. Amen." And then the bag slowly just drops from the heavens as music plays.
This
and it's why?
Wonderfully absurd scene, just classic Lisa world building. But I do have one gripe, and that is this kid orders his drink before the combo. Who the fuck does that? And it was a real immersion breaker for me. I had to say, he starts the combo with the drink order and then proceeds to the sandwich. And no one in the history of fast food ordering has ever done that.
Wait, for real?
Yes.
That is psychopathic behavior.
He starts with the drink, proceeds to the sandwich, then that's where he gets the double, no triple, with pickles or whatever, and then continues on with the order. But you have to be prompted for your drink order. You start with the sandwich combo, and what would you like to drink with that? The drink's always the afterthought.
Oh my God, I didn't even realize that. I'm going to try that next time I go to a Taco Bell or an Arby's or something.
Yeah.
Because I'm the one guy that keeps Arby's in business, I guess.
Please
I'm going to try
us.
ordering the drink followed by the combo. And then they're going to say, "What would you like to drink with that?" And I'm going to say, I mentioned that at the front.
Sir, no, that was obviously a separate part of the order. You don't know how this works.
Please leave. What is wrong with you? That's insane. You can try to order at Wally's, but they'll tell you in a sort of frantic style of speaking that they only do one miracle a day. So, of course, you have to go up and figure out what the hell's going on. There are 2 Wally's employees that are guarding this Holy Land that you have to get through first. A bit of a tough fight for me. I think I died on them at least once.
Yeah, I died here in the most recent playthrough. I showed up a little weak from my last bout of fighting, and I wasn't prepared to deal with them.
Yeah, it's a little tough, but you get up there, and there is, in fact, a Wally's. It's a McDonald's, basically. In the back, there is a guy in the mascot for Wally's that, sort of looks like a snow cone, and he's crazed and delusional, and he is not happy that you are there. There's also, this meat that's in there that's, implied, I guess, to be, I don't know. They never really go into where he got it, but you beat him, and then you go into another sort of hallucination state. with Marty's spiders. They're spiders from actually the first game, from Lisa the First, just little spiders with Marty's face on them. But progressing forward, we find Buddy's mask on a tree. Then we find Buddy.
Yeah, is this the first time we get to directly confront her?
In present time, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. She says, "They told me how important I am. You never cared." And we can see that Brad cares a lot, and that, he's kind of like making his whole life about making sure that she's safe and taken care of. And it's this sort of classic, it's almost a trope a little bit of like the parents really sort of being out of their depth and wanting to do the best, and you can see their good intentions, but also screwing it up in some ways, and the kids not being able to see through that part of it. And often maybe hearing an outside influence for the first time and sort of being led and sort of in awe by this new influence, and just writing off any positive intention or even any positive outcomes that are there among, the somewhat rocky, typical upbringing. And this one is anything but typical, obviously. But
yeah, and again, it's so he's so adept at writing Brad in a way that, it's believable that he thinks that he's doing the right thing, but he is doing anything but. He is being a menace and not protecting Buddy in the way that he thinks that she is. She I think you mentioned this, Charlie. She mentions that Uncle Sticky told her about being the last woman and quote unquote showed her, which causes Brad to get incredibly upset. And you forcefully take her and you leave. But as soon as you walk outside, once again, Buzzo's there and his goons knock you out. So when you wake up, he's got Buddy, and he says, "Do you know this man?" And she says, "Yes." And then he says, "What is he to you?" To which she replies, she doesn't know anymore. She doesn't know what you are anymore. Pretty big morale breaker to Brad, which is about to get builded upon tenfold, because Buzzo comes over and he says, "You're a sick man. You just want these joy pills. Look at him. He's sick." And then Brad's like, "No, please, just not in front of Buddy. Don't do this." But he force feeds you 3 joy pills, which each one kind of dulls the color of the game, which is a nice touch. And this causes you to pass out and go into a joy-induced hallucination that we're actually going to fully control here.
Yeah, so in this hallucination, you go through a cave, and eventually you encounter this gigantic version of Sticky, where his head is super elongated. It's like, as tall as some of the caves. So you actually have to climb the cave to get up to where his eyes are. And you then, in this hallucinated version of Sticky, is saying things like, "Come on, she's getting older. She wanted it. She's thirsty for this thing, or for knowledge. Someone needed to educate her," like further pinging off of that idea that stuck in his mind ever since she said that Sticky, quote, "showed me." He's taking it to the nth degree, to its logical conclusion, to the worst it could be. And then you fight him.
Yeah, not a difficult fight. But the fight isn't what's important here. We're getting a glimpse into the inner mechanisms of Brad's brain at this point. It's just sort of showing how distorted he is perceiving things. Even to be fair, he did just get forcefully overdosed on joy pills. Which is also going to heavily play into his character coming up, but it's not, he's not in an auspicious spot. He is in trouble. After you wake up, Buddy and Buzzo are gone, the goons are all dead, and you can get past the rando blockade, which was the goal. You get another flashback around here of Brad showing him teaching his karate class. Once again, though, it's showing you taking painkillers before coming back, and even your kids notice, like your students are noticing that something's not right and that things are not okay. Before the hallucination ends, before the flashback ends, Brad sees a boy that's sort of in the bushes, and he invites him to join the class. And this boy says, "I don't have any money," and the boy has a stutter. And Brad says, "That's okay. You're here all the time. Just join." Again, it's humanizing Brad in a way, like Brad does want to teach people to protect themselves, perhaps due to the abuse that he's suffered. But it also introduces that stuttering boy, and that's going to become super important as we progress forward.
Sidebar, who is that? Who does that person become?
Rando.
I don't know if I got that in either. In the current playthrough, I'm not to that point. I'm right around here. Like, I just had the sticky fight. I've gotten to the third crossroads, but I don't know that I've had this flashback yet. So you may trigger it somehow, like in a couple of different ways. I'm not sure, or like not in specific sequence.
I gotcha.
But I don't remember that from the first playthrough. It may just have gone by.
Well, we're getting to the end, and there are 2 scenes that kind of really confirm this. So we'll get there.
Okay.
There's another minor hallucination shortly hereafter of Brad being at Lisa's wake. He's having more severe hallucinations at this point. We also run into Columbo. He's got Buddy's mask, and he's, saying, I'm going to find her before you. Suck it. And then he runs off on his deer, whose name is Spaghetti.
So here you find Sticky in a rando uniform, bleeding out on the ground. He's reminiscing about how you both got along because of your abusive childhood. But then he calls you out. You're not keeping your chin up. He says, Buddy's not a gift to you. She's a gift to the world. And he sort of implies that he might have had his way with Buddy, which certainly sets you off. So as you're about to kill him, Rick comes in, who we thought we had killed earlier, but maybe it's possible that we just knocked him out. But either way, he comes in at this point to defend Sticky. And he's beaten badly as well. And so you get the choice where you can either kill them or let them live. I'm struggling to remember. I think I may have let them live in the first playthrough.
I think I was going full in character mode. I think I did kill them both. I don't think it has an outcome on the story, really.
Right.
It's just flavor.
Yeah.
You're shortly you're ambushed by Buzzo's goons. Buzzo has Buddy this time. Again, Buzzo, he doesn't feel that you've suffered enough. He says this, so he gives you an option. And this is probably the most intense of this is certainly the most intense of the ultimatums. He's either going to permadeath and kill your whole party, or cut off one of Buddy's nipples. Just really gruesome stuff. There's not really a humor about this. It's, again, it's not treated in any kind of humorous way. It's just intense and just upsetting. From a gameplay perspective, it's really best to choose the latter, because 3 party members are a lot, especially after the roulette. It's tough, but it's kind of ideal. If you choose to go this route, he cuts it off. She doesn't really even so much as flinch, and he gives it to you as an equipable item, and basically says, take this, you won't forget it. Oh, and one more thing. He tells Buddy as he's doing this, he's saying, this isn't me, this is him. So it's a really tough scene. Effective, but really, really tough.
Yeah. The first playthrough, I was going a little bit more utilitarian. I wasn't sure how much of a struggle it was going to be losing people, and so I went with the tough choice. I took the nipple. And it gets brought up at least one more time, and it's always there in your inventory. So anytime you're going in your inventory to do something, it's there as a reminder of the choice. The second time I took the party members, and so it set me back. It was going to make the game longer, more grindy. It costs a lot to make the quote unquote right choice. I don't know if it is the right choice. I mean, 3 lives are lost, so.
Yeah. This is a land where morality sort of ceases to exist. And right and wrong are really distorted and obfuscated. Buddy gets away from Buzzo pretty quickly. And he's just like, yeah, she's a tough one. But once again, he's going to give you another ultimatum. And I think this might be the final one. He lets you know that, he's been purposefully making sure that you've been addicted to joy, so as to quote unquote play with you more. Still doesn't believe that you've suffered enough. So he gets a goon to get you at gunpoint, and he says, either give me all of your possessions or your other arm. And this time, finally, the game, finally with Buzzo, I should say, gives you a third option to say, like, why are you doing this? And if you do it, Buzzo breaks for a second. But then he just says, he says something along the lines of, like, this is for wasting my time, you fucking murderer. And then he cuts your arm off and robs you blind. So I went gamer mode, and I did that on my playthrough because I knew it was going to happen. I just wanted to see how it articulated. I love that line, like, this is what you get for wasting my time. Like, you thought we could talk this out because it's a game. You're a fool.
Yeah, I knew that at this late in the game, the possessions were going to be, as I had been using items fairly regularly to keep myself afloat in battles, and I was also fighting enough with Rick. He was, he's in withdrawals as much as he's not, so he's not always the most. With Brad, there I go, and but I've been fighting with him with withdrawals enough to know that I had other strategies in battle that didn't rely on his power, and so I thought, I'll take the arm, I'll keep the items, and I'll manage somehow. And yeah, so at this point I ended up completely armless, and you're slower, especially climbing ropes, your movement becomes slower. When you ride a bike, you're kind of like steering it with your chin. You're kind of like hunched over. So it's really interesting. And you lose the ability to do combos. You instead of Armstrong style as a combat option, you just get bite. Now you can still do some of the effects that are the results of combos, but a lot of them have been taken away as choices.
This, at first, I thought this might be looking into it too much, but bite is also the main verb for joy mutants. And in a later battle, Brad gains more joy mutant abilities. So this is really subtle foreshadowing. I kind of like it. We're reaching our final crossroads, number 3. Buddy took off in Tardy's boat. Tardy is the cousin of Farty and Shardy Hernandez, and sailed off. And he says, we could catch her if we build another one. All we need is this, 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 and this. And then he basically just says, go get it. So just because this episode's gone on a bit long, I'm going to kind of streamline the stuff that you need. You need a toolbox, a mint cloth, and wood. Is that it? Wood, mint cloth, mint condition cloth, toolbox. Oh, and a fan. You do these, you find these basically by going to different areas and defeating certain bosses. If the episode weren't going so long, I would say maybe we could dive into it, but for the sake of brevity, there are a couple that are really cool in terms of backstory, particularly Snow Level, but we are going to move forward for the time being.
Yeah, I'll just say, as a sort of general comment, these were some of my favorite, like, flavored areas. They seemed really rich, and they were difficult but rewarding. So it doesn't completely seem like a collect a quest. It seemed like a device to push you into other areas of the game, other flavors, other backstories.
Yeah. It's man, it is a shame to skip past it, but at the same time, I don't want to keep you too long. They are very good. The backstories are grim. One backstory in particular in Blood Moon Mountain sort of hints at the origins of Joy and Buddy in particular. It's very good, and we cannot recommend enough checking those out. You find Columbo one last time. He tells you that there's a boat down the way, and he says, let's race to it. The first one there gets the boat. First one there gets Buddy. So he's on his dear Spaghetti, and you're on a motorcycle. Basically the same speed almost. But when you get to the end, there's no boat. And he's like, yeah, there's no boat. I've fucked with you your whole life. I'm not going to stop now. Then he's like, oh, my boys are dead, huh? That's not good. That's a shame. Then he kills his deer, Spaghetti, by shooting it in the head. And then he shoots himself in the head to be with Spaghetti and his dead men. It's it's this weird intersection of comedy and tragedy that I don't know how to feel about the whole scene.
Yeah, I think it's shock, right? It's an opportunity for shock. So like the comedy of it is the futility of the race and that he gets one last laugh on you, but then it's capped off by the shock of how he ends it.
Yeah, and it's effective. The humor at this point in the game is starting to take a back seat, which I think is largely the right choice. It's a good move. So once you get all the materials, you build the boat with Tardy, and you depart while your party is asleep. So you're abandoning them. Once you land, Tardy is like, "Yeah, let's look for her." And Brad says, "No, I'm doing this alone." To which Tardy says, I put in this work. I want a piece of her, and you have to fight him, which is a profoundly easy battle. You kill him in no short order. So now you're alone. But the bottle does have the island has a ton of bottles, implying that there's a lot of drinking going on here, which turns out to be from Marty, because in a cave, we find Buddy and Marty together.
Yeah, this was a scene that struck me as it was surprising to see Marty alive, and part of me was wondering if there was a hallucination aspect to it. And I don't think there's supposed to be, but it's certainly the shock of seeing him after he's only appeared in flashbacks at this point makes you begs the question. But the interaction here is really, really powerful and really painful. It's sort of twofold. A lot of the tragedy in your life is because of Marty, and now Buddy has found her way to Marty's care, at least for a brief time. And not only does he, seemingly does an okay job of taking care of her, but also sort of, which Buddy did, or which Brad didn't get the chance to experience from Marty, but also Buddy is saying, he's taking care of me when you couldn't or wouldn't. And so there's sort of a twofold slash there, coming from, both his parent and his child at the same time.
Yeah. And indeed, Buddy tries to defend Marty. She jumps in front of Brad and says, don't hit him, don't hurt him. He's helping me. You are beyond the precipice of joy at this point. It is sort of controlling your emotions. So you hit Buddy, to which Marty gets pissed off. And this triggers a fight. Throughout the fight, as you weaken him, his name changes from Marty to Father, which I think is interesting. And during the fight, Buddy again jumps up to try to defend him, and you have no choice but to just attack her. And it is just a profoundly sad scene. Buddy is knocked onto the floor. Marty is beaten and bloodied, and he's apologizing to you, and he's saying, I'm sorry, I et cetera, et cetera. And he mentions Lisa by name, apologizing to her too. At which point, Brad just flies into a frenzy. You black out, and when you wake up, if you go back inside, Buddy is gone, and where Marty was is just a bloody pulp. Just, you get the sense that it was the revenge that Brad had always wanted, and he was robbed of feeling that revenge, whether right or wrong, due to his addiction that has overcome him. It's profoundly sad.
Yeah, and it's you don't really get a choice. You have to play as the rage, brought on by joy. I feel like I remember trying to use non-damaging skills when Buddy was in the fight to save her, but there's not a way out of the fight that doesn't, you can't progress. You have to just push forward and be violent, and it causes pain to those you love.
Yeah, it's a very forward representation of how Buddy's been perceiving Brad's actions this whole time. Again, just the nuance in this writing is really, really good. And it sucks that some people write this off because of, the way it looks as a game. It's unfortunate. moving forward, you have to... Buddy ran off with your boat to the final area called Randoland. So to get there, you sail on Tardy's corpse, which is funny in a very macabre way, but a little funny all the same. There is a very brief fight with Sticky's father, who is somehow still alive. I don't understand how. He's got Buddy, and you beat Mr. Anganelli down to get back to her, but she flatly rejects you again. She's saying that she doesn't want your help and that you're only going to hurt her. And you say, no, I want to help you. And she says, Rick, Sticky, that's not what they say. And to which you reply, they don't know me. Nobody does. And she delivers a really powerful line. She says, I know you, Brad. I know what you really are. You're a monster. You've taken everything away from me. And also says that Marty was a better father to her than you ever were. Holy shit.
Yeah, that must be that I must have been ahead of myself a little there before, but the power of that cut really stuck with me.
Yeah. It's again, Brad is guided by ambitions that were once noble, but his actions have ceased to be that. He is not acting in a way that is good, but he believes himself to be, and he's finally sort of at this junction where he believes, like, this is what I've been coming for. And Buddy says, I don't want anything to do with you. Like, fuck off. Like, you were the worst thing in my life. Just, this is a hell of a scene. Like, I can't say anything other than the final scene is my favorite because, it's just incredible. But holy shit, dude, this hit hard.
Yeah, it's sort of, this is where, I don't know if he realizes, but this is where it's stated to him, like, and people have been trying to tell him all along, that you've been so consumed with trying to fulfill the goal that you feel like you are the hero that is supposed to complete, but on your way to that, you've tunnel visioned so hard that you can't see all of the bad that's just swirling around you on your way to there. You've stripped away all of your humanity and become the goal, regardless of, you haven't adjusted your expectations to make sure that that goal is still worth having, or that you're going about it in a way that will make it worth having when you get to it.
Yeah, it's inhuman almost. This also changes Brad's class into a failure. By the way, you go from fighter to failure. Interestingly, you don't take fall damage anymore. Somebody made an offhanded comment online saying, like, you don't get to kill yourself at this point, which I don't think is canon, but I love that. So deeper in, Buddy is in front of the entire Rando army. They're pissed off because her face is quote-unquote ruined from scars from Sticky's dad, which is just gross to me. She runs further in, away from Brad. And as you're about to go in, your party members that you abandoned, they show up to stop you. And the dialogue changes depending on who you had, but they essentially say, you've lost sight, Brad, like, she is the hope for humanity. She doesn't belong to you. Like, you've got to realize this is bigger than you. You've got to stop. Which leads into a fight against them. They don't really fight back very much. They half-heartedly do it, and they just cry the whole time. So you, quote-unquote, kill them. You don't get experience for killing them, which kind of implies that you didn't. And it's sort of further implied because if you do this whole thing solo, like without party members, you end up fighting like daydreams of your friends, like hallucinations of your friends. And the army also doesn't really react to any of this. So perhaps this is all just a daydream or a hallucination of Brad's because you are well beyond Joy Mutant territory at this point. Who's to say? But after that fight, Brad is just staring down the Rando army.
And I have seen it, I can't remember where, but I saw it mentioned that depending on how long you've been with the party member, they'll fight you less. Like the longer they've been with you, if they've gotten to know you, they'll waste more turns crying and humming and hawing, and they'll go a little bit harder if they're a more recent party member or if you've wronged them in some way. Like if you've got if you've got Rooster, like the only reason he's in your party is because you're holding his golden chick hostage, and so he doesn't really have any reason. He's doing it out of that hostage situation anyway, so he'll fight a little bit harder. So some of the choices and some of the way that you play the game, I think does, maybe it's just slight, but I think it does influence the way that this fight goes when your party comes to confront you.
That's a really nice touch. I had no idea that was implemented. So you run into Rando. He's in front of Buddy, and for the first time in the game, he speaks out loud, and it's to Buddy, and his voice is weak and has a prominent stutter. So this is where that flashback comes into play. It's implied here that your former student that you let into your class for free is Rando. Dusty Armstrong, as his name is. He became Rando. He tells Buddy, that looks don't mean anything, that a face means nothing. It's what's inside that counts. And the army is kind of in disbelief because, one, he's speaking. He built up this terrifying persona from being jacked as fuck and never speaking. But also he sounds super weak now. And, now the army turns to you and they're just like, you're not going to get through here. You can't fight an army. Give it up, bud. To which you get like a really, it's so weird. It's such a heroic line for such a dismal place to be that Brad says. He says, "You don't understand. I've been dead for 35 years. Today is the day I live," with joy hallucination backgrounds going on. So he's going into a joy rage. Weirdly heroic thing to say, juxtaposed against Brad sort of being beyond the point of compassion at this point. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, it definitely, if you're viewing yourself as Brad, like, there's definitely an invigorating quality of, I'm here, I'm at the precipice, I have nothing left to lose, and I'm about to do some baller shit like take on a whole army, right? So I think it's literally a high. You're riding this high into battle, and it gives, like, this moment gives you a chance to really empathize with his abandonment, like that breaking point, nothing left to lose.
Yeah, you're right. It is a literal high. You take on the whole army. It's, I think it's 4 waves, each one having about 6 enemies. This is where you gain other Joy Mutant abilities like Scream and Cry. As you go on, too, you get stronger and stronger, and your enemies continue to say things like, this guy's a fucking monster, he's not human. They eventually become too scared to fight or just run away altogether. But you're left filled with arrows, just beaten and broken, and Rando approaches you, and this is sort of the second callback, and he says, "Master Armstrong, like, we don't need to fight, like, she's the future." And of course Brad says, she's a kid. And Rando takes off his robe, and he's jacked as fuck, and this is where the Rando fight starts. He uses the same style of fighting as you do, Armstrong arts.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's almost like this Dusty was one of the first people in your life, in Brad's life, that he got to nurture, and to a certain extent was successful. I don't know how we're supposed to assess Rando's effect on the post-apocalyptic world. It's certainly powerful. Maybe some implied brutality, but there's not a whole lot of explicit brutality. Just has a large force and maintains power through that, through like the consolidation of power, maybe. And this is ultimately where Buddy finds herself, in the care of this person that is quote unquote successful because they had somebody like Brad to look out for them. So that's like, it's almost the image of what Brad could have been. And yet here he is face to face with that. Like, it's like a mirror match. You're fighting with the same style. This is your student. They've gone on to succeed where you failed. And they're the thing standing in the way of the one thing that you want.
It's interesting too. They're sort of set up to be a foil, Brad and Rando. And this is sort of dipping into the joyful DLC, but they're from the same dojo. Brad trained Dusty Rando. And like you said, Rando doesn't rule with like explicit violence. He's largely just protecting other people because that's what he wants to do. He even gets upset when Buddy tries to fight in Joyful. Like he says, you shouldn't be doing this, So in that way, like he really is, not explicitly, but he serves as a good foil to Brad. But of course, in this scenario, he does not win. Brad really beats him down. As you continue to fight him, his mask breaks and you see his face is like deformed and crying, and his name changes from Rando to Broken Man. I alluded to this earlier. You don't kill him, but he's maimed horribly. And this sort of brings us to this final scene between Brad and Buddy.
Yeah, this is... When you say this is like... I can't remember exactly how you framed it, but this is a depressing game. Like, these final moments are really what hammer that home. There's dark humor, there's dark themes and materials, but the story is crafted so well, you're so invested at this moment that this truly, like, hits you emotionally.
It's a lot. It's a lot. Brad at this point has so many arrows sticking out of him. He's literally crawling to Buddy. She's crying. And again, she rejects Brad. She basically tells him that he ruined everything that she's ever had. She's been locked up her entire life, and she finally had a chance at life. And he took it away from her for these selfish desires of protecting her and giving her what he thought was a great life. When in reality, all she wanted was to have autonomy in this, awful hellscape. She says things like, why are you trying to hurt me so much? And Brad starts to do this, like, it almost does this trope of like the hero giving a sort of moral speech at the end. And she just cuts him off and she's like, don't preach to me. And she's like, it's too late for this shit, and you can't just be a father all of a sudden because you want to. And, Brad tries to come back and say, like, I just wanted to help. And she says, you've hurt me more than any other man that I've ever known in my life, including everybody, this army. So Brad is, it seems like he's finally accepting his shortcomings here. And the game ends, at least here, with Brad asking Buddy for a hug. And as Buddy, it lets you choose what you get to do.
Yeah, I chose the hug. It seems like maybe it's selfish. I don't know. Maybe as somebody who played as Brad the whole time, you're hoping for one small piece of this to go your way. Because when you look at the whole arc of the story and the way that it ends, it doesn't. It just, there's almost no redeeming part of the arc. It's just things turning to shit and you making it worse. And so you really crave that hug in that moment. And the way he says it is, will you hold me? I want to know what that feels like. Like he's never had that in his whole life. And it's really hard as empathetic humans to see somebody who is in that state and refuse that wish in their final moments. The tragedy is just laid bare.
Yeah. And branching it out further, Brad's never really had any friends that, offered him this level of support either. So it's this familial longing along with just general friendship, this gap that he doesn't have, that he's now asking Buddy to at least give him a glimpse into. Whether you hug him or not, the same outcome happens. Brad just sort of stops and he's like, did I do the right thing? And then he passes out. And that's where you get the credits. Sort of. The credits roll, but there are subliminal messages all throughout the credits. We get like the flashes of the flesh hallucination wallpaper, messages saying like, take her, take her, take her, or just Buddy's name, things like that. And when it comes back, Brad is fully mutated into a joy mutant, still in the same spot that he was before. And You slowly crawl towards a house. Inside is Buddy. You refer to her as Lisa, and the game ends. That is the normal ending of the game.
Yeah, that credit scene is intense, and I'm sort of in real time having a realization that well, when I saw it the first time, it was just sort of jarring, and sort of seemed like additional flavor to go along with sort of the world that's built here. But when you look back, you realize like this is the transformation. Like the conscious you is dying, and the joy mutant part is all that's left.
It is as intense of a visualized metaphor for addiction and trauma and the cycles that manifest out of them that I think I've ever seen. And it's powerful. You know, it might seem silly to some that haven't experienced it to be moved so deeply by a $10 like practically 16-bit game. But to that again, I say the writing and how the themes are handled are done in such a realistic way that is not filled with tropes, and it's not filled with succumbing to expectations or anything like that. It's very real, as humans who have experienced in one way or another cycles of these things in different forms and different degrees. It's undeniable, or at least that's my take on it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. The package doesn't always dictate the quality of the contents.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's stupendous, but it is a lot.
And I like what you mentioned there about, it's not filled with tropes. It's not filled with maybe certain expectations or cliches. Like, I think that sort of abandon that he approaches the contents of this story with gives him the freedom to avoid those kinds of things, right? The humor is so absurd, the characters and the scenario is so bleak that it's hard to let it fall into a trope. And so even though maybe the through line is like sort of an upside down hero's narrative, all of the things that dress it seem original, fresh, authentic.
Yeah, the upside down hero's narrative. I like that a lot. That really is what we're seeing here, isn't it?
Yeah. And to bring it back once more to the interview, like I think that same endorsement you're giving, like try this game, don't judge it by its 16-bit appearance. Like that's sort of his philosophy. I think that's how he came up with a game like this to begin with, was he talked about in that interview not caring so much, not trying to please everyone, but to like kind of keep your head down and make your art that speaks to you, and hopefully show other people that you don't have to win a popularity contest to make great art. So don't give up where other people say, "Oh, you're working in RPG Maker. That no good games ever come out of that." Like he wants to show, if you really want to be original and speak with your own voice, like that good things can happen.
Yeah, and I think now that we're roughly 3 hours in, that is a nice end cap to this episode.
Well, Rick, thank you so much for trusting me to come on this podcast and talk about this with you.
This very, very light episode as your first time on the show, also taking over for the other co-host.
Yeah, quick romp.
No, man, the thanks is 100% to you. Thank you for bringing your insight. I knew it was going to be genuinely informed and well considered. So we're really glad to have you, and we're really glad to have you for an upcoming episode that shall remain secret.
Whoa. Too. No spoilers.
Yeah, Lisa, everybody. I think it's an easy recommend for both of us, right?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
Worth your time.
So if you've been listening this far, thank you for listening. Just wanted to quickly list off some of our socials. You'll see a link to the Discord in the show notes. We'd be happy to have you. It's a low-key and generally fun time. Charlie's a member, so you could come and hang out with him if you prefer him over me and Ben, but we're there too. We've also got a Twitter and an Instagram. You can find us there, but generally by searching Pixel Project Radio, but we're at Pixel Project Radio Podcast on Instagram and at Pixel Project Pod on Twitter. You can also email us if you feel so inclined. That email is in the show notes as well. And once again, we just like to say thank you. If you liked what we do, give us a share with your friends. Tell some folks about us. Give us a rating and review on Podcast Addict or Apple Podcasts if you feel so inclined. We always try to read those on the air as new ones come in, especially if they're 5-star. And with that, I would just like to say that my name is Rick Firestone.
My name is Charlie Young.
And thank you for sticking around and hearing the tale of Lisa. We're signing off now. Take care.